It's 8:47 on a Thursday evening in the 10th arrondissement of Paris. The cafes on Boulevard de Strasbourg have just lit their terrace heaters. The metro hums beneath the pavement. And on a narrow street running east from the boulevard, the shops are still open. Every single one of them, lit bright as daylight, glass fronts steamed faintly from the warmth inside. A teenage boy in a hoodie steps off the Line 4 at Château Rouge station and climbs the stairs into the cool evening air. He pulls his phone out, checks a name, and starts walking down the street. He passes a window with a row of leather chairs inside, a man in his 30s leaning back, white cape over his shoulders. He passes another, and another. By the time he stops outside the one he came for, he has walked past 11 barber shops in less than 2 minutes. He pushes the door open, and the sound hits first. Clippers buzzing, a football match playing on the wall-mounted TV, two men arguing in French over a song someone won't stop playing on the speaker. Wolof drifts in from a conversation in the back. A child sits on a stool eating peanuts. The air smells of aftershave and shea butter and warm metal. A man with a fade so sharp it looks drawn on with a pen lifts his eyes from his client and nods. "Dès le prochain. You're next." The boy sits down and looks up. The shop name is painted across the mirror in gold cursive lettering. Below it, smaller, the owner's name, Diallo, or So, or Ba, or Kamara. Names you'll see again and again and again across this city. Across an entire country, in fact. Wherever a young man in France goes to get his haircut. If you've ever spent a weekend in Paris, you've probably walked past them too. Not just in the 10th arrondissement, in Barbès, in Château Rouge, in the suburbs of Saint-Denis and Montreuil and Aubervilliers, on the high streets of Lyon, in the back lanes of Marseille, in the working-class neighborhoods of Lille and Toulouse. Glass fronts, bright lights, leather chairs, a row of West African men with clippers in their hands, working past midnight on a Tuesday. And the numbers behind those clippers are staggering. Along a single half-kilometer stretch of Rue du Château d'Eau alone, more than 200 hair and barber shops operate side by side, the densest concentration of Afro-Caribbean grooming businesses anywhere in Europe. Across the Paris region, tens of thousands of men of West African descent now make their living behind a barber's chair. In some immigrant neighborhoods, 9 out of every 10 barber shops on the street are owned by people whose grandparents were born in Senegal, Mali, Côte d'Ivoire, Guinea, or Cameroon. It's not just a business, it's the only place we can go and feel completely at home. And here's where it gets stranger. Most of those barbers don't just come from West Africa in general. A huge share of them trace back to a single cluster of countries along the Senegal River basin. Senegal, Mali, Mauritania, and Guinea, bound together for centuries by language, marriage, and trade. A region the French once colonized, drafted into their wars, and then quietly tried to keep at arm's length. Today, that same region runs an entire layer of French men's grooming. So how did the descendants of West African farmers and soldiers come to define how a generation of young Frenchmen looks in the mirror? How did a community pushed to the margins of French society end up at the very center of its street style? And why does it all trace back to a war that ended more than 100 years ago? Tonight, we're traveling from the banks of the Senegal River to the back streets of Paris to understand how migration quietly rewrites the culture of a nation. The African barber story in France doesn't begin in a barber shop. It begins in a trench. In 1914, when the First World War broke out, France was short of soldiers, so it turned to the only place that could supply them in large numbers, its colonies in West Africa. Over the next 4 years, more than 200,000 men from Senegal, Mali, Burkina Faso, Côte d'Ivoire, and Guinea were conscripted into the French army. They were called the Tirailleurs Sénégalais. Many of them had never seen snow, never worn boots, never spoken a word of French. They fought at Verdun. They fought at the Marne. Tens of thousands of them never went home. Those who survived returned to villages along the Senegal River with two things: a small French military pension, and a memory of a country that had needed them. A seed had been planted. France had become a place West Africans knew. Then came the Second World War and the rebuilding that followed. By the 1960s, France was an industrial machine running on full power, and it was short of workers again. The government quietly opened the door to its former colonies once more. This time, it wasn't soldiers it wanted, it was hands. Men from the Senegal River Valley, mostly Soninké, Tukulur, and Fulani villagers, boarded ships and planes for Paris. They were given the jobs nobody else would take: cleaning the metro at 3 in the morning, sweeping the streets of the 16th arrondissement, hauling concrete on construction sites that would build the suburbs they themselves would never be allowed to live in. They slept in foyers, vast worker dormitories packed 40 men to a floor, in neighborhoods like La Goutte d'Or, just below the white domes of Sacré-Cœur. It was supposed to be temporary. Earn money, send it home, return when the village rebuilt itself. Almost none of them ever returned. Because once one Soninké man was settled in Paris, his brother followed, then his cousin, then the cousin of his cousin's wife, then his son, born in the village, who arrived as a teenager speaking no French and slept on the floor of his uncle's tiny studio in Barbès. By the 1980s, entire villages along the Senegal River had emptied themselves into northern Paris. Streets like Rue de Jean and Boulevard Barbès became a second home. Markets selling cassava and dried fish. Cafes playing Senegalese mbala music. Mosques tucked between houseman apartment buildings. But the factories that had pulled them here were already beginning to close. The construction boom was ending. And by the 1990s, an entire generation of West African men in Paris faced a question their fathers had never had to answer. If the work that brought us here is gone, what do we do now? The answer, for thousands of them, was sitting on the other side of a mirror. For decades, French men had two choices when it came to their hair. There was the traditional coiffure, the white apron salon with its leather upholstery and its bottle of cologne behind the counter, charging 40 francs for a trim, closed by 7, closed on Sundays. And there were the barber shops in the immigrant neighborhoods, which most Frenchmen never set foot in. But the barbers in Château d'Eau and La Goutte d'Or had something the French coiffeurs didn't. They knew how to cut hair that wasn't straight. They had been cutting it their entire lives, first under a mango tree in a village in Senegal, then in their uncle's foyer in Paris, then in a borrowed back room of a Malian restaurant. When the factories closed and the construction work dried up, these informal trades suddenly became something else entirely: a profession, a livelihood, a way out. But there was one major obstacle. Renting a storefront in central Paris costs a fortune. Most newly out-of-work African men had no savings, no French credit history, and no relationship with a French bank willing to lend to them. The banks looked at undocumented or recently regularized migrants with names they couldn't pronounce and quietly turned them away. So the community built its own system. A cousin who had saved 2,000 francs lent it. An uncle who owned a phone shop on Boulevard Barbès gave you the keys to his back room. 6 men chipped in for a single chair, a mirror, and a set of professional clippers, and they rotated shifts. You cut from 8 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon. Your cousin cut from 2 until 8. Your friend's brother cut the late evening. The rent got paid. The clients kept coming. And every spare franc was sent back to the village or used to buy a second chair. And the shops themselves became something the French coiffeurs never could. They stayed open until midnight. They opened on Sundays. They charged 15 euros where a French salon charged 60. The men inside didn't just cut hair. They ran the neighborhood's unofficial post office, holding letters for newly arrived cousins. They were the WhatsApp hub before WhatsApp existed, passing news from Bamako and Dakar from one chair to the next. They were the job board, the marriage advisor, the football fan club. A teenager would walk in for a fade and walk out with 3 job leads and an invitation to a wedding. That was the quiet advantage. A French salon sold haircuts. An African barbershop sold belonging. And within 20 years, that difference would change who young Frenchmen, of every background, went to when they wanted to look sharp. But as the African barbers spread across French cities, so did the attention. The clients in Château d'Eau changed. What had once been a neighborhood trade became a magnet, pulling in customers from every corner of Paris, every weekend. With the crowds came complaints. Local councils talked about overcrowding, about the racolage, the recruiting sergeants pulling clients in off the street. Police raids on undocumented workers became routine. In 2014, 18 African hairdressers and barbers, mostly West African, occupied a single salon on Boulevard de Strasbourg for more than 3 months, protesting the bosses who had exploited them and the system that had left them invisible. They won. But the fight never really ended, and yet the chairs kept filling. By the 2020s, the best fades in France weren't being cut on the Champs-Élysées. They were being cut in shops run by the grandsons of the Tirailleurs Sénégalais. French rappers shouted out their favorite barbers in Château Rouge. Footballers from Paris Saint-Germain flew in their preferred Senegalese clipper specialists. A generation of young Frenchmen, of every background, every color, now grew up understanding that if you wanted to look truly sharp, you went to a West African shop. The barber was no longer an immigrant's trade. He was the keeper of the cut. Late tonight, somewhere on a narrow street in a French city, a glass front will still be lit. A pair of clippers will be humming. A young man will be leaning back in a leather chair, watching a barber's hands move with the certainty of an inheritance. Passed down from a village along the Senegal River, through a foyer in Barbès, through a back room rented for 2,000 francs, all the way to this mirror. Their grandfathers came to fight a war that wasn't theirs. Their grandsons now shape how a country sees itself. Cut by cut, fade by fade, chair by chair. The next time you walk down a street in Paris and pass a glass front full of light, take a look at the name above the door. You might notice a familiar one.